she's in the new workshop. So here's a little tour of what's coming up next on the jobs list. So now she's back in the shop, there's a handful of little jobs that need finishing up. The cut water, as you can see, I'm kind of halfway through that at the moment. Needs a little bit of modifying because it's not quite fitting right down the bottom. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm probably just going to cut this up here where there was a join originally, and then just reshape that and make a little adjustment to get that to sit properly. I'm not really a metal worker, so you'll have to excuse my finishing there on that. Then the rubbing strips are going to be fitted into the cut water, so the idea is that these will kind of follow straight on into that that shape there. So it should look quite nice once that's all fitted in together and polished. This is all going to be chromed eventually, this brass work, so that'll be nice when I finally get the money up together to do that. The varnish is going to need some more work, so it's kind of had its settling period now. A couple of people asked questions about why that was, and you can just see the sort of texture in the varnish there where it's sunk into the grain a little bit now, and you're starting to see that print through. So that's part of the reason for letting that sit for a while, is just to let that happen and then flat all that back off, and I can rebuild on top of what's there. That's a good hard base now to start building the final few layers of varnish. I'll probably do about another 10 on top of this, I expect, and I'll be a little bit more meticulous with little bits in the varnish and the dust and stuff like that. There's a couple of things that I'll show in the last video of that series that just shows how to keep things really clean and set up a little temporary booth in the workshop to try and get the finish spot on for the last coat, basically. So working along down, you can see the name that I've got on the side there. That's going to be chromed eventually as well. Same with the engine hatch strips. I've got to make some brass for the rubbing strips there, so they're going to have the same kind of profiled brass going along those, and then they'll kind of fit into the transom bands as well. So you can see those are shaped, and then they'll meet, the brass will come around here and meet into this, which should be quite nice. I'm working on the steering at the moment, so that whole system's going to be installed. I've got the internal bridge to fit inside the back there, and then the rudder system, which is over on the bench. I'll show you that in a minute, which is going to go on the transom. Really nice sort of jewel in the crown that is, I think, so that'll be good to get that on. I've got the steering hub to sort out as well, so that's all got to be installed, and then the cockpit floor, and then a few jobs to do on the engine as well. So the engine's actually going to come back out. It's just sort of resting in there at the moment. There's a few little things I've got to do on the cooling pipes, change them slightly, and the alternator's not actually hooked up yet. I've got to modify the bracket to take that properly. The exhaust is going to change as well. I'm going to go up to a 3-inch exhaust and just change the way I've got that water entry going into the outlet from the manifold, so there'll be a few things to tweak there. A couple of little bits to do on the engine hatch. This isn't quite sitting very well at the moment, just because I've got that gas strut on one side, so I think I'll either put another gas strut on the other side, or I'll move that one up into the middle there, up forward, which would be quite nice because it'll be right out of the way then when you're trying to get to the engine. So that's probably what I'll do, I expect. And then it's going to be sort of engine alignment, so I'll get the shaft seal in place. Got a PSS seal for that. Get the engine aligned once I've done the little jobs on it and fixed in place. You can see it's sat on its bearers there, so there'll just be some little shims that fit under the mounting legs to align that. It's all solid mounted, the engine, so there's no flexible mounts on it. There's no flexible coupling. It's just bolted in straight. So it might be a bit of a teeth rattler to begin with, but if it's too bad I can always put it onto rubber mounts afterwards. So we'll see how we go. My Reliance tachometer gauge. So a few of you might think I'm a bit nuts putting this on, really, because it doesn't actually match the engine. It's only goes up to 2,400 RPM. But it's an original gauge with a ceramic face, and I really wanted that gauge on the dash just to sort of give a nod to the period that I'm trying to make the boat look. So I've got to find a way of running that tack off of my engine somehow and gearing it down. I was probably thinking of gearing it kind of 3 to 1, so what shows as 1,000 RPM on the gauge is actually 3 on the engine. So I kind of know what it's doing, but it's a bit of a tricky one. There isn't actually a mechanical takeoff on the engine yet for that, so anybody's got any ideas about how I could do that, I'd definitely be interested to hear about it. The other option I thought was potentially getting an electronic tack and putting the innards of it inside the old Reliance gauge, and then just using an electronic tachometer with the look of the old one, basically. So I'm not really sure about that. It's a bit of a challenging one. As I say, a bit odd to be using something that's completely wrong for the engine, but for me it was really about having something that looked right as a priority, and I know what it's doing behind the scenes, so that's fine. So over to the bench then, you can see the rudder system. So this is going to be mounted on the transom, and it's a 2-quadrant system. So the internal quadrant will be driven either by a teleflex cable or hydraulic ram, and then these 2 quadrants will be joined together with cables running parallel, and they'll steer each other effectively. And so this will be fitted inside the boat, this one, and this one will be mounted outside on the transom, and the cables will run through the transom, and the 2 will steer each other, or the internal one will steer the external one. So there's a bit of mounting hardware to get into the boat for that. That's going to be next to go in. Get this all dry fitted, and see how we go from there. So that's about where I'm up to. Hope you're enjoying the progress of the build, and more to follow soon, hopefully.